time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Myers. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. And you can also find the link in the description of where to buy this wonderful book. I have it for sale in my Etsy shop. Our new church. After we got everything settled about buying the church, we started arguing about what we should call it. I said it's going to be called Ebenezer, and it's still called Ebenezer to this very day. A little later, when we were planning to build some Sunday school rooms onto the church, we were told we would have to go to some office in town and get papers filled out so we would have a tax exemption. So Mitchell went into town to do that for us. They asked what the name of the church was, and he told them Ebenezer. What denomination is that? He told them Independent. It's Ebenezer Independent. Independent what? Just independent. You can't just be independent. There has to be a denomination listed. Mitchell didn't know what else to say, so he came back to ask me, what should I say? What denomination are we going to be? Not Presbyterian, that's for sure. We'll be Baptist. So he went back and told them we were Baptist. What kind of Baptist? Well, I don't know what kind. Miss Opal just said Baptist. What kind of Baptists are there? Well, there's Free Will, there's Missionary, and they told him some others too. So he come back and asked me again, and I said, Missionary, tell them we are missionary. When he went back and told them missionary, they said, where's your covenant? Covenant? What else do you need to know, and what else do we have to have? You have to have a covenant. If you don't have one, we can do one here for you for $2. Mitchell had never heard tell of a covenant, so he came to ask me. At this point, we had moved past annoyance and aggravation to just plain ridiculous. I said, don't ask me. I don't know. That's the reason I have you looking after all of this. We got so tickled after that. All we could do was laugh about this lengthy legal process we were going through. So Mitchell went back again with $2 in his hand and told them we wanted a covenant. When we got that covenant, Mitchell and I went over to the church and stuck it up on the wall. We both said at the same time, that thing ain't never coming down, and then we just laughed. The date of the church's reorganization was July 20th, 1969. After the reorganization of the church, we had several different preachers come up here to preach for a spell at a time. One of the preachers said, we're going to have to change our classes around. I don't believe women ought to teach adults. Mrs. Myers can teach the children if she wants a class, but I don't think she should teach this one. So we just made a joke out of it, and I went ahead and took a little class and did everything else I was allowed to do. I would tease and say, well, I don't care if I have a class or not, and I don't care if my name is on the roll or not. Neither of those things has a thing to do with my place in this church or going to heaven. But I'll tell you right here and now, what's really important and what really matters is that nobody else sits in my seat and that I get to ring the bell. I've been sitting here on this bench and ringing this bell as long as any of you, and as long as the Lord lets me do it, I'll be right here. This will be my seat, and I'll ring the bell. I was only joking, of course, but maybe everyone took me seriously because no one ever sat in my seat and everyone waits on me to ring the bell. Funny, isn't it? Vacation Bible School. I had a friend in Newport who loved attending Bible conferences, and for sure she did go to a lot of them and met people from all over the country. Well, at one of those conferences, she met some people from a Baptist church in Detroit, and in talking with them, discovered that they sent teams out on mission trips to conduct vacation Bible schools all around the country. She told that group about us and our little church, and they decided to come up here, a whole bus load of them, and then some. My friend took care of all the details from this end of things, including making arrangements with a company in Knoxville to bring out and set up a trailer or a food wagon, I think they called it, for cooking. I took care of getting the word out about the Bible school and getting the church ready. Of course, I had a lot of help from the church people. We fixed up the church and cleaned up the churchyard so there would be a place for them to pitch their tents. We didn't have any wells in the community, so all the water they used would either have to be carried up from the creek down below the church or brought over from the big spring on the other side of the creek. That was the only way any of us up here could get fresh water out of the springs. They could use creek water for washing themselves and the dishes or for cleaning up the tables and such, but they would only use the spring water for drinking and cooking. With all the people coming, that meant there would have to be a lot of water toting. I went down to the spring and cleaned it out real good, then stacked rocks on both sides of where the water came out. That kept leaves and other stuff from blowing in and covering the spring. The group from Detroit was supposed to be there by 10 in the morning, and the food wagon was to be delivered around 2 o'clock. Well, I thought everything was ready and going pretty smoothly until that afternoon when someone from the church called and said, "The men from Knoxville are here with the food wagon, but they won't leave it without the $100 deposit. The Detroit people are supposed to pay, but they ain't here yet. They're a-running real late. What are we supposed to do?" Well, I had no idea at all what to do, so I just prayed. In the midst of my praying, wouldn't you believe that I recollected a lady in Newport who belonged to the Presbyterian church there. When we first bought the church, she gave us the first $100 to pay towards it. So I called her and told her about our situation, and she was glad to help. I assured her that the people from Detroit would pay her when they got here, but she said not to worry about it. It didn't matter if they paid her back or not. The company left the food wagon and went to our house to pick up the check. It wasn't until that evening that the Detroit people actually got up to the church. They seemed to have one delay after another. The last one was because of the weight limit on that little bridge down yonder just after you turn off the highway, you know, where the road crosses over the stream there. The bridge was a narrow one, mainly for people to walk across and for cars. It wasn't safe for anything heavier. Trucks usually went around the bridge right through the creek bed. Of course, the bus driver didn't want to do that. When he saw that bridge and the weight limit, he told them he couldn't take them any farther and ended the trip right there with them sitting in their seats wondering what to do next. There were 4 or 5 cars loaded with luggage and supplies that had followed the bus all the way from Detroit, and of course the bridge was fine for them. The driver and some of the men unloaded the rest of their suitcases and supplies from the storage area under the bus and stacked them on the side of the road. Maybe 1 or 2 of you can stay here with this stuff, and you others can walk the rest of the way and carry some lighter things. They thought that maybe they could start doing that, and their people driving the cars would go unload and come back and get some of the heavier things. But I guess that it was just the Lord's will that they ride up to the church, because right at that same time, a big old logging truck came along headed towards the church. He started driving through the creek, but when he realized what was happening, he said he would take them. There were 45 people who came down from Detroit with all their belongings, so it still took a couple of trips. We had people sleeping everywhere. We moved all the church benches against the walls, and a bunch of them slept there on the floor inside the church. The others slept in tents. There were tents all over the yard. During the morning, they had Bible school for all ages, including the adults. While that was going on, some of the workers would be cooking lunch. Then there would be more classes or crafts in the afternoon. I can still remember the singing and laughter. I mean to tell you, I do believe there were more people on that hill than there were ants in it. In the evening, we would have big campfires where we roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, and then there would be an evening service with more singing and preaching. The entire community had the best time ever. This was truly one time that all the outsiders were welcomed and appreciated. Many of the community people even joined in and helped clean up the dishes so the church people could take a break. The last day of their stay, we sent them off with a big picnic of fried hamburgers and everything else you could imagine. I still hear from the Detroit group. Every Christmas they send us a little donation. This year they sent $25 and we're going to use it towards building a partition between our Sunday school rooms. Fixing up the church. We always have a project that we're working on for the church. We've kept up with our pledges for projects for 5 years now, all except for building the partition between the Sunday school rooms. This is the first time we've gone over our deadline for getting a project done, but there's been so much sickness and such since winter started. I haven't been feeling good for a while now either, so I haven't been able to go there to preach and keep the project going. We've got nearly enough to pay for it, though, with the donation from Detroit, and then the money 2 of Catherine Marshall's friends from Florida sent us to use as a memorial to Catherine. As soon as I get feeling better, we'll get that done. It won't take us long once we have enough money to buy the materials. The menfolk up here can build it in no time at all, and then we will be able to have one side of the classroom for a nursery, and the older children would have a place of their own on the other side. I guess we've really had projects like that from the very beginning, since we first decided to move the mission church to its present location. The old church had to be taken apart very carefully to prevent the dried out old wood from splitting, board by board, piece by piece, and nail by nail. Everything was saved so we could use the same building material to build the new church, since there was no money for additional supplies. That first winter, after the church was rebuilt there by the cemetery, we realized that the boards in the walls had not been placed close enough together or overlapped. The cracks between the boards were wide enough to let the cold wind blow through the church, biting our fingers and toes until we nearly froze. Back then, women didn't wear pants to church, but for sure we wore our heaviest long stockings under our dresses or skirts and big old heavy boots. The men weren't any warmer than we were, and those poor little young'uns were so bundled up they looked more like fat ticks on a dog, too big and round to barely move. Even though the winters were so cold, we couldn't come up with money for more boards to cover the inside walls or even enough money for insulation, which we certainly could have used. Every week I would go down to the church early enough to gather downed wood and kindling from that property right there by the cemetery and start the fire so it would at least be a little warmer by the time the people got there. This one winter, I guess because it was such an especially cold winter and everyone was burning more wood, the man who owned that property told me not to use any more of his wood. Well, I didn't know quite what to do. I couldn't carry that much wood from my place, so it only seemed natural to have everybody pick up a piece or two of kindling wood from their own places and bring that along with one larger piece of wood with them to church. Then during the week, with the help of some others, I worked at getting a stack of kindling and some good-sized pieces of wood to the church, enough to start a decent fire. The next Sunday, when the people came with their wood, the church was already warming up and pretty comfortable, if you left your coat on. We stacked up the wood they brought outside the door to be ready for the next week. During the week, when some of the men cut firewood for themselves, they would drop off a piece or two, so we were able to keep a nice little stack of wood outside the church all winter long. That, along with what the other people brought, would usually be enough. That's how we all stayed warm, well, as warm as one can be with a cold draft coming in. One winter, I guess Lawton Turner got tired of being cold from that fierce wind whipping through the church like it did. "I'll put $100 up if you panel this church." Well, that started something amongst the congregation and soon inspired everyone to give. We saved and worked all through the next summer, If people didn't have any money, they would make something and sell it. A little later, another man and 2 or 3 children dug the pit out there behind the church and built our first toilet. When Mr. and Mrs. Divens built that nice big modern log home down below the road on Old 15th and moved up here, they did a lot to help the church. They're both just naturally business-minded and know what needs to be done and how to do it. Mr. Divens is a big shot, but he never acted like one. He would get down on his hands and knees and do a lot of the dirty work himself. He had Benja help him put the insulation under the church because Benja was so little and skinny that he could easily move around under there. Then Mr. Divens put up all the underpinning. As long as Lawton was able to, he would help too. In fact, he and Mr. Divens did most of the work that had to be done. Sometimes Mr. Divens would hire someone else to do a special job. He would always make sure that the church got a really fair price, and then he would pay for it and let us pay him back in installments. That way, we didn't have to pay any interest. We're still paying on our air conditioner. Every 4th Sunday, whatever we collect in the offering is given to Mr. Divens. Mr. Divens taught the adult class most of the time too. He's well read and knows a lot, and he's a good teacher, even though he did get a little above their heads. He reads all these Bible dictionaries and Bible helps and things like that, so you can imagine how much he knows. In these parts, we need more Mr. Divens. He is really good for the people. Most of our community can read and write, but this is just an average country crowd. The first Sunday I was back at church since I'd been sick, there wasn't a soul to teach the class but me. Mr. Divens was out sick, so they asked me, "Miss Opal, since Mr. Divens isn't here, would you teach the class?" "Why, I haven't been here for so long, I don't know where you are or what Mr. Divens has been teaching you, and I don't know nearly as much as he does." "Go ahead, you know the Bible better than any of us do. If we put a chair up there for you to sit in, could you just teach us a little?" "I don't need a chair. I'll be fine standing up. This pulpit is just the right height, and it makes a fine place to lean on. Besides, it's hard for me to get up and down. I've held the adult class several times since I've been sick. Mitchell teaches most of the time now, but when he's been gone, I'd take it. Of course, I don't really consider what I do teaching. Most of the time, we just read the Bible and enjoy the scripture stories. And it's still mere tradition that I sit there on the same seat every time I'm at church. It's funny, but nobody will sit in that seat if I'm there, and they always ask me if I want someone to ring the bell for me because I have trouble getting up and down. I guess after all of these years, I really do have my place and position in my church. My place or seat is a bit back from the front on left side of the church, and my position or job is bell ringer. Of course, outside the church, I had a lot more positions that didn't have a fancy title like that. So we'll stop right there today. You can tell we're getting to the end of the book because, of course, you can tell that Opal's getting older. And now in this part we read that she'd been sick and not able to go to church for a good long while. And then when she did, she wasn't able to get up and down as easily. So we're getting close to the end. I wanted to read, let me go back and find it, one little footnote that I didn't read during that, though, about the Presbyterians. And I'd kind of said this before, but is that she wasn't, like in this part it says we're certainly not going to be a Presbyterian church. She wasn't throwing off on all the Presbyterians across the United States or the world. It was just those in her area that had been lackluster, and worse than that, but to help them. And of course, then tried to sell the church right out from underneath her to make a bar out of it. But it says Opal's anger was only directed towards the local Presbyterians. Even though she felt abandoned and then betrayed by them, she still had strong ties with numerous Presbyterian friends, pastors, and mission workers for the remainder of her life. She was deeply grateful for all the Presbyterian Mission and Highland Institute did for her. So again, I've said that in another video, but since there was that little footnote, I just wanted to read it and make sure that it's not that she was mad at all Presbyterians. She just, that left a bad taste in all of their mouths, how they'd been treated by the ones just in that little area where she was at. Kind of funny how this part starts out when they've got the church now. The last reading we did is where she had to buy the church to keep it from being turned into a bar from the Presbyterians, and how humorously she bought it like a backdoor way, so they didn't even know that she was the one that had bought it. Anyway, if you missed that, you can go back and listen to that part. But then they've got to build onto it. So from the very beginning, they find out, well, you got to jump through some hoops. And it looks like when Mitchell went to find out about that, they would have said, this is what you need. You got to know the name of your church, you got to know the denomination, you got to have a covenant, like they would have told him all that stuff. But instead, he'd find out one thing, and he'd go back and tell them, and they'd say, well, you need to know this, and he'd go back, and it took 3 or 4 times for him to finally get everything they needed. And like she says, they were kind of getting frustrated and aggravated about it, but then they just decided they just had to laugh about it. They just have to laugh about that stuff and let it go. Interesting too, during that part, she talked about once they had all that under, everything was took care of, and they had their denomination, and they decided they'd be missionary Baptist, and then they had the covenant that those people made for them. Interesting then that they started getting different preachers to come, and maybe a preacher would come. It seems to me like maybe she means a few months and then leave, and then maybe another one would come. But one of them objected to her teaching, and which is kind of ironic, because if it wasn't for Opal, the church wouldn't even be there. I mean, she saved it so many times over the years from the very beginning, even before they moved it, even before they took it down and moved it. She had saved it, and then, of course, she was responsible for getting it moved and doing that part. So that's kind of like, and you didn't want her to teach, and without her, you wouldn't be standing here preaching, you wouldn't be here. But also, again, amazing Opal, she said, all right, I'll just do what you tell me to. I'll teach the little ones, and do anything else you allow me to do. And then she kind of teases about, but that's my seat, and I want to ring the bell, which she says, I was just joking, but they took that part serious. So I thought that was interesting, and that it showed Opal's real personality again, that she could have got upset and said, well, I'm done with these people. She didn't. She just said, okay, I understand. I won't teach anymore. While you're here, I'll just teach the little ones. That'll be fine with me. I'll just do that. She was an amazing woman. Then they find out that the people from Detroit are going to come and have the wonderful Bible school, and as Opal begins to think about everything that needs to be done, of course, they're going to clean up the church, they're going to straighten up the churchyard, make sure there's room for tents, but then water. You got to have water, especially for that many people coming. And in those days, even though by this point, it was in the 60s, if not early 70s, I would say, but at least the late 60s, they still didn't have any running water. She said there was no wells, so the only option was still the spring and the creeks. And so she has to figure out how are they going to tote all that water. So she sets to work trying to figure that out. It's such a different time for us to imagine, isn't it? To need that much water. You think about the water you would need for your own family, but then if you had 50 or 60 people coming, how would you provide water for them? Really a daunting task, but it wasn't to Opal. She didn't even think anything about it. She just set to figuring out how to accomplish it and how to make sure that she got it done before they got there. Then they're going to come, and then the little hiccup about the $100 deposit for the food truck, and nobody there had $100. Opal didn't know what to do, but she prayed, and God answered her prayer by reminding her of the lady who said, sure, I'll take care of it. So God just worked that little wrinkle out. I love that. But even more, I love the log truck, probably because my Papa Wade was a logger, and my uncles and even Pap at different times were loggers, so I love that part. You can just imagine, maybe if you've been to an area like where I live in Appalachia, if you've not, or maybe where you live in a rural area, maybe you can imagine it, but I can just see that perfectly, how the bridge was fine for people, for like wagons or horses or whatever, and for a car, like my car that I've got today, but how a big truck or a big bus couldn't do that. They couldn't go across it. But local people didn't think nothing of that, so they just kind of went down beside of it, went through the creek, forded the creek, we would say, and then went back up on the other side. But the bus driver looked at that and said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. And maybe it's because he knew he wasn't capable of driving it, or maybe he thought it would tear the bus up and it wasn't his. You know, it was probably a rented bus or something like that. He was probably just a bus driver for the line that let the people bring the bus to deliver them. And so they were going to unload everything and just because some people had drove their cars, just make trips, you know. But then the log truck saves the day. I just love that. That's just so perfect. I love that God sent a log truck to help them. And then the best part of that is that she says, you know, that it was such a huge success and all the community come, and they all had the best time. Even people that didn't even come to church come, and then they ended up like volunteering to help. We'll help facilitate this so that the people from Detroit can actually rest. They can eat. We'll take care of the food, you know, and let them go get a minute's rest. And really precious that she says the people in Detroit stayed in touch with her, and that they continued once a year to send her an offering to help their church. That's just so priceless. That's just wonderful, beautiful. And then the end of this that we read today is, I guess it'd been a time after the Detroit stuff and cold winters and stuff like that, or maybe it hadn't been. Maybe this had been just during that time too, as far as the people having to bring the wood. But again, thinking about how you needed water for everything. Well, you had to have wood. You had to have wood for heat. You had to have it for cooking. You had to have it for, especially in this area where they're still at, you know. Maybe in other places there was other options, but in this place where they were at. So again, Opal, how does she, you know, by this time she's getting up in age, and how's she going to provide wood to heat the church? How's she going to do that? So she takes it upon herself to go early and go over to that little wooded area next to the cemetery and just get whatever she can get that's blown over or fallen down or whatever. And then comes a real hard winter when that man, I guess, that owns the property says, hey, I might need that for my family, so don't get no more of it. And then she comes up with everybody will just have to bring some. But isn't it amazing? So everybody just kind of brought a stick or two of firewood, stove wood with them, and some kindling. And then she did say during the week, her and whoever could would go try to take some extra. But then before you know it, they've got ample supply. And then the church is warm. She says if you keep your coat on, you know, it's not like it's really warm, but if you keep your coat on, it's bearable. Again, just the testament to Opal, just saying, well, I guess we'll just all have to bring a stick of stove wood. I guess that's what we'll have to do. And so they did it, but then it was like that was blessed, and then they ended up with ample supply, and they stacked it up outside. Beautiful, beautiful thing, all because Opal said, let's just do this. And that's happened so many times in this book, so many times. Mr. and Mrs. Divins, they were really a godsend to her, sounds like, because of their knowledge of business, the way they could look at things, and then because of, I'm sure as handy and crafty as he was, Mr. Divins, at like working, says he'd be right down in there on his knees and hands and doing the insulation with Benja, was, if you'll remember, was Opal's one of her grandsons, doing all that. I'm sure his wife was just as handy, so she's really, really thankful for them, and really, it sounds like they really, really blessed her. And then the last little part of this one is, you know, where it's that, you know, they never take her seat, and they always leave it open, even when she'd been out sick and she come back, and then they said, you know, would you teach, and could we put you a chair up there, and because he was sick by that point, he was out, he was sick, and she says, no, I could lean on the pulpit, you know, and talk that way, and so kind that nobody would ring the bell unless they asked her first. Very kind, but then also you can see they all owed Opal so much, and like we think we know that just from reading the book, like I feel like I know that, but I didn't know Opal, I didn't know these people, I'd never been there, I've never been to that area, so they knew intimately what she had done they were the people blessed by what Opal had done. So they intimately knew that. So no wonder they treated her with such reverence, such reverence. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the book as much as I did. I do have a little something I'll share with you, is that I had a wonderful experience. I got to meet Barbara League. I got to meet Barbara League, the author of this wonderful book. So we got to talk about Opal for a couple of hours. It was really great and really wonderful to meet her. What a blessing. She really blessed me. Got to meet one of her sons. He was very nice too. Real blessing to get to meet both of them and spend time with them. She told me a lot of interesting things about Opal. Some things, stories and things, you know, that didn't make it into the book. Some just kind of stories of how they had so many memories of going to visit with Opal and stay with her, and all the years that they knew her and that they would go. And you know, her son Jonathan grew up going there like her other children did too, but I got to meet him and had memories and stories of playing with Opal's grandkids, and you know, the wonderful food that Opal made, and the beautiful place that they lived, and the ruggedness of it, you know, the real ruggedness of the area, and the terrible road that she lived on, and all that kind of stuff. But it was just such a pleasure to get to meet them. And interesting, you know, about the seat there that Opal sat in, and that they wouldn't, people kept it like that. You know, they were serious about it. Like she says, I was just joking when I said that, but they kept that serious, and they knew that was Opal's seat. Now, while she wasn't there, somebody might have sat in it, but if she was there, they knew that's where she sat. It was very, very touching. Barbara told me that at Opal's funeral that they attended, her husband Manley was one of the pallbearers. Nobody, like the whole church, she said, you couldn't even imagine the church packed with people outside that couldn't even get in, that just wanted to be near the whole, you know, the service to honor Opal. They left that seat open. Nobody sat there. That's just such a touching, like, remembrance of Opal, isn't it? That they left it open even at her funeral, but nobody sat in it. Now, the log truck and the bus breaking down, and or not being able to go across the bridge, it didn't break down, reminds me too of another thing about her funeral. Was they had part of it in Newport, and then as they had to go to this area, it was a long drive. It was a long drive, very rugged, and the roads and stuff were still not the best. And they're almost pulling up like one of the last steep grades to almost make it to the church, and the hearse, the water pump goes out in the hearse and can't go no more, and all the other cars are behind it, and there's no way to get around it to go on. Like, we'll just go on and wait for Opal or something, so everybody just had to stay where they were at. And somebody had to go back and get a water pump, and they had to bring it and then change it there on the mountain, on the steep mountain, and then be able to go on to the funeral. But all those people just stayed and still went and still congregated at the church. And then it had rained a lot, and so when it come time to carry the casket, instead of going one way, they had to literally lift it and go over a fence. Anyway, it's really extraordinary service, I'm sure. But all that to say, I thought about after Barbara had left, and, you know, I'd already talked about her, and I've been thinking about all these things she told me. I thought even in death, Opal's, that last day, I mean, she was done and gone on to her reward, richly deserved, I would say. But even in that, there was like these trials and troubles of the heavy rain and the car breaking down just crazy on the steep grade, and nobody could get around it, and everybody just had to sit where they were at. But her people, all her people, just persevered. You know, they just pushed through, just like Opal would have done. You know that. You know, she'd have been the one out there saying, well, what's wrong? You mean the water pump's out? Well, let's get somebody to go back to Del Rio and pick up one and bring it, you know, or wherever they had to go for it. So it was really, really wonderful to meet Barbara, though, and just makes this book even more special to me. And I know it is special to many of you. I was going to say I hope it is, but I know it is. So many of you have told me you've just been so touched by Opal. A lot of you have bought the book so that you'd have your own copy. Some of you have bought it for other people, to give it to your mother, your sister, your brother, whoever, because you knew that they would enjoy it. So I know you feel the same way I do about Opal. And because I think you probably feel like that about Barbara, like I did before I met her, because if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't know about Opal. What a gift. What a wonderful gift. So really blessed to know about Opal, and I feel very blessed to have met Barbara now too. So please leave a comment and let me know what jumped out at you about today's reading, and I hope you'll drop back by next Friday so we can see what happens to Opal next.